Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Perry, please call the roll.
Dr. Hoyta.
Here.
Dr. Case.
Here.
Dr. McBride. Here. Mr. Perez.
Here.
Mr. Widman.
Here.
Board members review the agenda. Any additions, deletions, or corrections, Mrs. Perry?
I have none.
Anyone else? Mrs. Perry, call the roll.
Do we have a motion in a second?
No, I'm
I'll
sorry.
make a motion.
Mrs. Perry, call the roll.
Mr. Widman.
Yes.
Dr. Case.
Yes.
Dr. McBride.
Yes.
Mr. Perez.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyta.
Crystal Apples.
Thank you, Dr. Hoyta. Yes, it's my privilege and honor to be able to award 2 Crystal Apple Awards tonight to 2 members of our staff. I'd ask Jen to award these tonight. And so if Norbert Sugar is here, if Norbert would please come forward. Want to introduce Norbert? Got a few things just to share about Norb. As most of you know, Norbert, or Nub, as most people know him, was born and raised in Tiffin. He attended St. Joseph's Elementary East Junior High School and graduated from Columbian High School. Upon graduation, he started working at American Standard until the plant closed in December of 2007. Norbert started working at Tiffin City Schools in 2008 in the transportation department. And as soon as he could obtain all the necessary credentials, he's been working for us since then. So there are a number of different aspects to the Crystal Apple Award. In terms of teamwork, Norbert is described as one that he drives our pre-kindergarten school bus. He's developed an amazing team with his bus aide and all the people teaching at Lincoln pre-kindergarten. He greets each child, has a clean and inviting environment, and works with the bus aide to ensure a cohesive setting for each child. Because of this team, our young students have a special person that greets them as they start each of their days and as they return to their parents. Norbert works with the young people when they are upset, laughs with them when they're happy, and provides them an exceptional adult role model in their life. In terms of his commitment, he's committed to doing a great job. He's always on time with a clean bus, waiting for each of our students. Even when with the inclusion of face masks and extra cleaning, he's ready, willing, and able, and shows great pride in what he does for his job. In terms of leadership, in his current day, and in this age of COVID, it's affected our staff and students. Norbert has maintained a positive attitude and a gentle nature. He makes certain to check in with each youngster as they get on the bus and leave the bus. He also talks to any staff member helping students on the bus. And that attitude and service needs to be recognized as leadership, as he's an example to all of us. He forces us to realize the very things that are essential and necessary. Kindness is just one of those. Norbert takes a lot of pride in his work. Many of us would say that driving a bus could be a very difficult job, but Norbert makes this position reflect the real importance this job has on our students and on their education. He's often the first and the last one who sees these little faces. He checks in with them genuinely and truly cares how they are perceived because he is proud of his work. The students see how important doing a good job is, no matter what job you're doing. Norbert attained his certification to drive a school bus in 2008 and has successfully recertified twice during his employment with the Tiffin City Schools. He's also successfully completed yearly training and in-services. His biggest accomplishment is reaching preschool students and making them feel wanted as he provides a great adult role model for them. So, Norbert, it's with great honor that we congratulate you on this Crystal Apple Award. Congratulations. We also have Caitlin Hafer, one of our teachers. If she's in the audience, yes, please come forward, Caitlin. Caitlin is a fourth grade teacher at Noble Elementary School. She holds a Bachelor of Science in middle school or in middle childhood, grades 4 through 9. Her teaching fields are science and social studies, and her endorsements are in language arts and math, grades 4 through 6. Caitlin has been a teacher with us since 2010. So, describe how this nominee demonstrates excellence in the area of teaching. Well, Caitlin is an excellent teacher. She puts students first no matter what. Her state test scores prove what an outstanding teacher she is. She always has the highest math scores in all of the fourth grade, with the exception of maybe the gifted students. She's always using new technology in her class to help meet the needs of her students. Caitlin's lessons are clear, fun, and structured to meet the students at their current educational level and pull them up to the next level. In terms of her commitment, Caitlin is very committed to teaching. She's at the school most nights until after 6 p.m., grading papers, planning lessons, looking for new ways to reach her students. She also spends part of this time on the phone with parents to give them praise or to offer help when needed. Caitlin will do whatever it takes for her students to succeed. Caitlin is a great leader. She is on our building leadership team, and it's always providing insight for this topic. She's willing to take charge when needed to get a project completed within the building. Caitlin's also does a great job with our teacher building leadership team, making sure what needs to get done and completing those tasks as soon as possible. Caitlin's classroom is very student-centered. She works well with all of our student ability groups. She utilizes small groups, whole group, and individual student teaching methods, using whatever method is necessary to reach each student and to help them learn. She tutors students during her lunchtime and after school if it's necessary. Caitlin makes a huge impact on each of the fourth grade students' education. Caitlin is very deserving of this award. She's a leader, a go-getter, and a compassionate and dedicated teacher. She knows what it takes for a student to be successful and develops plans for each one to succeed. Her students love her, and for a good reason. So Caitlin, we're so pleased to be able to award you this Crystal Apple Award. Congratulations, and we're just so thankful that we have you as part of our team here in the Tiffin City Schools. Congratulations and thank you. If both Caitlin and Norbert would come forward, we want to get a little picture of you together.
Moving right along, item 4 is the Tiffin Tornado Academy presentation. Jen?
So, first of all, on behalf of Tiffin City Schools, I'd like to thank our board members and all of our staff for their hard work. This year is a very challenging year for everyone, from our staff to our students to our community. Tiffin Tornado Academy came into existence because we realized that our families needed something different, whether it was a health concern, whether it was an emotional concern, whether it was a scheduling conflict, whether it was just a student wanting some unique services or a different way to go about earning an education. So the Tiffin Tornado Academy came into existence last year, and we worked tirelessly then, and we continue to do so now. Our academy is focused on our students. We do everything within our power to try to provide the support that they need, whether they're on a 504, an IEP, or receiving gifted services. My advisors are Lee Alvarado and Christine Shaver. Those two ladies are constantly connected to their computers, I feel. They're always checking emails, they're sending texts. They're also known to do home visits and check in on our students. We are no different than our teachers within our buildings in that we care about the whole child, we care about the family, and we do whatever it takes to try to reach them and to make sure that they're safe. Tuesdays have become our attendance intervention days. And while it can be a difficult day in that you're meeting with families because students are falling behind, what we've found is that it's actually a very good experience in that we get to know our families more. We get to hear about their stories. We get to hear about what their barriers are, and then we work together with our buildings to try to remove some of those barriers to address their needs. When we first came into existence, it was merely out of a desire to keep students within Tiffin City schools. While that is still a desire of ours, ultimately what we want to do is we want to make sure we still provide a quality education just like we do within our buildings. And we can do that, again, thanks to your support in letting us have this program. We have curriculum that is K through 12. We are able to provide small group interventions to address reading needs with Miss Alvarado and Miss Shaver. We are able to provide special education support and services with our special ed staff. This evening, you'll notice that we're also adding an additional staff member. Celeste Dunn will be coming on board with Tornado Academy. She's one of our previous Tiffin City Schools teachers who had left to be a stay-at-home mom. And now she's going to balance mom and work life once again. And she's going to help us out with our students who have special needs. And we're very excited about that. High school this year is able to support us. We have Miss Rindler who comes and provides Zoom sessions 5 days a week to address language arts skills. We have Mr. Donaldson who does the same in regards to our history. And when it comes to mathematics, we started the year with support from Mr. Hartenstein. With a little bit of a schedule adjustment, we now have Mr. Firstler. These three individuals work tirelessly during their day to provide quality instruction to our face-to-face students, but they also do the same with our online students, allowing them to Zoom in for an appointment or sometimes to come into the building and meet with them to make sure that they're understanding what is going on. We also have our educational consultants for the Tornado Academy who assist in the background with grading papers and staying on top of things and answering students' questions when it gets to an area that is out of what we consider to be our area of expertise. If you are considering what to do for your child, I always recommend you do what's best for your child. We can provide absolute positive quality education no matter which environment you choose, but you need to know your child. And we would love to have a conversation about how they can be supported in the classrooms within our buildings. But if you have a unique experience and you feel like you need something outside of that, we can also have a conversation and see how we can address that for you. Really important to remember, we have high expectations, just like our buildings. And because it is an online program, we have to be really unique sometimes in how we go about keeping track of attendance. So student engagement equates to their attendance a lot of times. So when students start to fall behind, that's when we come into play and we meet with those families. In talking with the families, many of them are extremely appreciative in that we take the time to sit down and meet with them, find out what's going on in the family, and then try to address all of those different barriers that are in the way. Our ultimate goal, like I said before, is to provide a quality education everywhere, but we also understand that sometimes the best education comes in a face-to-face setting. And it's important to remember that while we can provide a blended system where students can go for face-to-face and online, if a student is unable to keep up with the pacing of a program, we do have the right and we do take that right to make sure that we voice that it is best for a student to learn in a face-to-face setting. So please understand, if you're applying to the Tornado Academy, we review all those records, we take everything into consideration, but ultimately, we're no different than you in that we want what's best for your child. Very soon, we'll be sending out survey information to gather interest in the program for next semester. Currently, we are at about 189 students in our program, and we want to continue to provide that support, but we also want to make sure that every student that's in the program is willing and ready to work just as hard as they would if they were in the classroom. So, does anyone have any questions? Yes. Okay, so from the beginning of the year until now, I would say we have probably had around 12 students who have left our program. Some have gone to other online programs, some have returned to face-to-face, and there are a few who have now gone on to do homeschooling where the parent is in charge of their education and their curriculum. So. Well, weekly, we usually get at least 6 requests to join our program. So since the beginning of the year when we originally started, I would say we've probably had 65 requests to join our program. But again, with that careful review of records, talking with the buildings to make sure that it's a good fit for the student, not all 65 of those students have come into our program. Yeah, transition is unique in regards to any student who moves into a school. And you have to kind of think of it in regards to that. We're a school just like all of our buildings. So we have students who move from out of state into our buildings. We have students who move from out of state into our building. We have students who transition into from face-to-face learning into our program, and it can be very difficult dependent upon when they join our program. Our program is set up for a semester, so they are semester-long courses. It is not the same curriculum that is being taught in the building. So like, for instance, right now, we have some families who would like to join right now, but dependent upon their academic situation, it is not in their students' best interest to join us, because what would happen ultimately is we would average their grades from where they're at in the building with the grades they earn with us over the course of the next 4 weeks. They are still responsible for their final. So even though they're only with us for 4 weeks, they would have the entire semester, half of the year's material that they would be responsible for. And we don't want to see students set up for failure. So in those situations, we are really encouraging families to wait until the start of January, the new semester. But again, it's dependent upon the situation of the students and how we take them into the program and how we try to assist them with that transition. You're welcome. Anything else? Yes, Dr. White. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And ideally, like we've talked about that before, where we have like a hard deadline and we say, by this deadline, you have to make the decision and be committed to moving into our online program. The problem is life happens. And there are unique situations for students and families that sometimes a deadline, while it's sounds really good in theory for us in regards to making sure we have staffing correct, we also have to take into account that student, and we have to take into account their story and what supports they may need to be successful. So while it sounds good to have a hard deadline, and I'd love to say this is the deadline and you've missed it, I don't think that's fair to our students. And it certainly isn't fair to our community if we're not allowing a different learning mode for some of those students. So we do allow them to apply outside of it. But again, a lot of times we also have the conversation about when might be the best time for that student to transition in with us. So, thank you. Anything else? Thank you. You guys have a great Thanksgiving.
The Business Advisory Committee met in Fostoria at, I think it was the high school, wasn't it?
Was the board office,
The board office, okay, it was the board office, I couldn't
which is
tell.
connected to the high school.
Okay, yeah. So it was the board office of Fostoria. There was probably, what, a dozen people there? And the rest on Zoom, probably another 20 or so on Zoom, of which I was. And Chandler Grooms called the meeting to order, and we spent most of the time going through the bylaws and talking about board memberships. And there was some debate about, whether you needed to have a board member from each school district that's involved, or more than one from each district. So it would be a quite cumbersome board if you had a member from each. So I think we decided to keep it more of a smaller board. But do you remember what the final decision was?
There's
A lot of discussion about it.
no executive committee.
No
so there's
executive, yeah.
no officers per se. And they're hoping for a staff member from every school to be part of it. And then they're not sure how they want to work with the business community,
Right.
how they'll join the board. And they'll bring all issues to the full board.
But I think Chris, amongst some others, were pretty vocal about having an executive committee so that you could get things accomplished and not have such a cumbersome organizational structure. So they were still working on that, I think. Committee structure was also discussed. We talked about I think the bylaws did pass. I think we passed that. The marketing, talked about the logo. And I don't have a copy of it. We don't have a copy of it, do we? Yeah. Anyway, the logo, it was designed by Spire and NCR, where it's got an arrow
Check
upward.
mark.
A check mark, that's right. It's not an arrow, it's a check mark. Talked about the website. We talked about manufacturing showcase, brag program, some goals. So all in all, it's a pretty extensive, broadly encompassing meeting. And I believe the next meeting is in February. So that was,
I think you're right.
I think it was third Thursday of February, and I don't know the place. I think Chandler's probably going to try to get it in one of the other school districts, I believe. So, any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Gase. Mr. Perez, Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We met Tuesday and went over the usual stuff, but we also had the updated November forecast. However, caution on that, it still is based on simulations. We don't have final numbers according to our treasurer. As to what the forecast updated provide, I'm going to defer to the superintendent to explain how that fits into his future planning if he wants to discuss that. We'll probably meet next month as well. And I would thank Mr. Williams for being there as well.
Support Services, Mr. Woodman.
Yeah, support services met on November the 12th. And a lot of the conversation had to do with transportation as we prepare for the closing of the Ella Street Bridge. And so I think we're doing a good job of trying to be proactive and have things in place before that happens. Issue with the boilers at Columbian. We believe that's due to some of the hard water that's being utilized. We have a donor that wants to fund the replacing or the fixing of the windows at the stadium press box because they are foggy. And talked about the farm lease with Dylan Smith. And our next meeting is Friday, December the 10th.
Continue right into the Vanguard Sentinel update.
Right. Well, I'm going to call upon Gunther. Gunther has attended the last two Vanguard Sentinel board meetings with me. And so he's going to give the report, and then I, of course, am available for any questions.
The last meeting was last Thursday on the 18th. During that meeting, some of the topics were the associate school visit / remote learning week, in which the students and staff took a remote learning week. The purpose for this was for associate school students to visit programs of their choice, and Sentinel opened up the application process. And so far, there's over 100 students who have applied for signing up for Sentinel in the upcoming year. The COVID cases were discussed. From the last meeting, there was a small spike, but it was still less than the high of last month, so it has been deemed negligible. For hiring, no current teachers have submitted their plans to retire, so there is no current need for searching for new teachers. And we discussed a variety of grants and financials for the upcoming future. And additionally, we also discussed a kind donation from Reineke, as they are donating some parts for the program there at Sentinel. Mr. Whitman, back to you.
Very good. So it was a pleasure to have Gunther attend the meetings with me. So it's, I think, a good experience for him.
Did a nice job on the report, Gunther. Well, just one quick question. You said 100 students. Was that 100 Tiffin City School students?
Just from whoever they had, they didn't say.
Gunther, you're up again. Your student report.
It's actually Mr. Shawberry this month.
Thank you. So I will be reporting on recent notable events at Noble Elementary within the past month. So firstly, the school collected nearly 700 cans of food for the Salvation Army Food Bank. Noble would also like to extend a thank you to the PTO for supporting their positive behavior intervention supports, quarterly awards for their first quarter carnival. And that's basically just PBIS, as we usually refer to it as. And looking forward, they are anticipating a movie award for students in December for the second quarter as well. And lastly, they wanted to congratulate the staff as they earned the Bronze Award from the State of Ohio Region 7 for implementing PBIS steps.
Thanks, Andrew. Any questions for Andrew? Moving right along. Dr. Zoller, Superintendent, Assistant Superintendent's reports.
Yes, Mr. Bose is not able to be here tonight. He's been out sick for a couple days, so just want to let the board know that we are putting up the first reading of the curriculum guide. It's hard to believe, but we're actually getting ready to plan for the next school year in terms of scheduling and programs and the like. So you all received a copy of that with some of the minor revisions that have been identified. So that's up for a first reading tonight. In terms of COVID, we continue to work through and manage the situation. Our numbers are relatively, good. We've been relatively stable throughout the school year in terms of the number of students and staff that have been impacted. Just looking at today's dashboard, we have 15 confirmed active cases of students that have contracted COVID throughout the district. 85 students are currently in quarantine. 4 staff members have actively contracted COVID, and 0 staff members are in quarantine. So the numbers have been relatively stable in that range for the most part. We certainly have been aided by the newly revised guidelines for contact tracing and quarantining. So that has helped us out considerably. We still continue to struggle with finding substitutes for teachers and other staff members that are sick. Certainly this is flu season as we're entering into this time of year, so we know we've got a number of people that are out with other physical ailments besides COVID. So, but I really want to thank and commend our staff members. They continue to step up and fill in where needed, oftentimes giving up their planning periods or their breaks to make sure that that our kids are properly supervised and their needs are being met. But that's kind of where we are regarding COVID at the moment. Yes.
So a number of other districts, just popping up in the news, have been taking that into account, just some of the way that staffs are stretched so thin, especially with the sub shortage. And they're working to build in breaks or taking off extra days to help accommodate the intense levels of stress, because they're not getting planning periods. We have phenomenal teachers who are staying till 6 and all of those pieces. Do we have any mitigating factors like on the horizon or that we've thought of?
Yeah, I'm certainly open to having those conversations. I know it was brought to my attention rather late that there were some districts that were actually either closing early for the Thanksgiving break or going remote. And I didn't feel like we had enough time to adequately plan that for our district. So that's certainly something that we can look at for the future. But certainly the mental health, wellness needs of our staff are a concern. And I know we've got a committee that has been meeting and that are looking at some strategies that we can maybe work towards providing some additional supports for our staff. People are working hard, and I know everybody's looking forward to not only this Thanksgiving break, but Christmas and the holiday season as well. Going right into my comments regarding strategic planning. Unfortunately, we had to reschedule our meeting that was previously scheduled for November 17th. Our facilitator had a last-minute conflict with his schedule, so we've rescheduled our next strategic planning meeting for Wednesday, December 1st. We have had a community survey that's out that has been closed now, and I provided the board with a brief summary of what some of that feedback was. So I appreciate our staff, our parents, our community members that took the time to provide that feedback for the district. I think we have some good feedback there that we can use to build upon. What we're going to be doing next is beginning to use that information to start identifying the various subcommittees that we want to develop goals around for our strategic plan. So we'll be talking about that at our next meeting. And again, I certainly want to thank all of our community members and staff members that are giving up their time to participate in that strategic planning process. I can assure you that it is a time-consuming and a cumbersome process at times, but it will be well worth it at the end to have a document that we can use to help guide our decision-making and our goals and objectives going forward. So that will continue, and I'll be able to provide more information in December. And I do just want to, again, thank all of our staff and our teachers, our administrators, for all of their hard work this year. It's been a very difficult year as we're still trying to work through everything related to COVID. As I mentioned, we're experiencing staff shortages at pretty much every position across the district, but our folks have really stepped up and stepped in wherever they're needed. I do really appreciate their hard work and all their extra efforts, and I want to be sure to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving holiday, and I hope that everybody's able to take some extra time to relax with family and friends. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Zala. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Morgan.
So I have a question about a piece that's in the consent agenda. Would you like me to ask here or later?
Probably here is fine. This
Okay.
is fine.
So one of the pieces that we have in the agenda coming up is a resignation of a pretty vital administrative staff.
Mhm.
And that's had some conversations that have popped up and some questions. Can you speak to the planning as we move forward with that role?
Yeah, I received notification from Nick Smith. I believe Nick is in the
here
audience somewhere. Yes, Nick has submitted his letter of resignation as the director of our Special Services Department. So this was a little bit of a surprise to us. Obviously, Nick has been working with us to try to close the loop on a lot of loose ends that are currently hanging out there. But we've had a number of meetings internally to try to address all of both the short-term, primarily the short-term concerns that we have. Obviously, we're going to need to post the position and look for a more permanent replacement for Nick this spring. But in the meantime, I've directed Michelle Tewitt to kind of step up and fill that role temporarily. Michelle has been working with Special Services Department as well as our central office with Ms. Kuhn, myself, Mr. Bose when he gets back to make sure that we have all of the various areas and needs of our students covered so that we can continue to serve them. We're going to take this as an opportunity to really do a deep dive into our Special Services Department and see if we can't maybe restructure the department in a way that's going to make it more beneficial and make us more effective and efficient with meeting the needs of our students. So the short answer is Michelle Tewitt is going to kind of help spearhead that process for us, along with Molly Depew and the other, the teachers within the special education department. We've got a great team there. Everybody's been very open about doing whatever they need to fill in the gaps and to meet the needs of our students. So while I'm very disappointed that Mr. Smith is leaving us, he did a great job for the district. He has served the district for many years, both as a school psychologist and then most recently as our Special Services Director. I want to thank Nick and wish him well on whatever's next in terms of his future. But I also feel good that we'll be able to use this as an opportunity and continue to get better in that department.
Thank you for speaking to that. I know that's a population that we really want to be sure that we're transparent with, and the parents have had a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
And I just wanted, Dr. Zoller, and board members, we received a letter from the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio in October. It said, "Dear members of the Tiffin Board of Education, this is to notify you that your superintendent has been selected to participate in a unique professional development opportunity called the Dream Innovation Leader Team, Dream Team, sponsored by the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio. The purpose of the Dream Team is to build leadership capacity for future-focused educational innovation. A cohort of 20 superintendents from Northeast Ohio have been selected based on their willingness to innovate and create educational environments that are conducive to meeting the needs of all students now and in the future. Mike Zoller is such a superintendent. He is among the elite group of 20 leaders selected for this future-focused professional development opportunity. His selection will connect him with other innovative educational leaders in Northeast Ohio and expose him to some of the latest and best innovative thinking about ways to better prepare students for their future world. We are excited to include Mike as a member of the Dream Team and congratulate him on his selection. Sincerely, Dr. Bob Menjurek, the superintendent of the ESC of Northeast Ohio." I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate you all, you also, Dr. Zoller.
Thank you. Thank you.
Item 503, Director of Operations Report. Mr.
Yes.
Daniels.
Yes, Dr. Zeller and myself had a meeting with Bricker and Eckler via a phone call about the land acquisition for the bridge. They're looking to get an 8-foot piece of right-of-way so they can build the proper bridge with the proper wide sidewalks so all the bridges in town match. ORC code does not let us donate property if there's a chance of it's valued more than $2,500. So her recommendation to us was we do a purchase agreement with the city of Tiffin for $1. So that is what we're working on. That will be moving forward for the December 17th board meeting. And I'd like to also thank Matt Watson with the city engineer's office. As we've been working through this for the last 2 or 3 years, different things. And originally, the bridge was going to start in March as the weather broke, so that would affect 2 school years. As we've moved along, they're to the point now where they're able to start after school's out early June and finish by November, so it only affects a 4-month period of our school district instead of a couple months in one year and a couple months in another year. So I definitely want to say thank you to Matt Watson for that. Any questions?
Mr. Daniel, so that actually, like, I think buys some time regarding the busing situation, correct? Because we were looking at 2 years without the bridge originally.
Yes, that's correct, and that definitely does help us. Mr. Conger at Support Service talked about putting out a survey to the students in that area of town that would be affected to find out what the level of need would be.
Right, and I think you've been kind of modest. You guys have been working on this since Mr. Bose was interim to get this bridge project done, correct? And it's going to get us wider sidewalks working with the city, correct?
Correct. It'll be just like the little bridge the canal bridge they replaced, or the bridges downtown. Pole lights on it, really nice.
And with that, we get safer sidewalks for the kids walking, and that piece of land, some of it's even in the water and not very
Correct.
useful. So it's a
There's no value to the land for us as a school district.
right, and so it's
Something
a,
to maintain.
it's a great mutual respect piece, and we get really safe sidewalks for the kiddos. But
Correct. Actually, a couple years ago, I had to cut down a tree. It cost us $400 that I thought belonged to the city, but it basically touches the bridge, so that's why they need the extra couple feet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Item 6, opportunity for the public to address the board. Each person addressing the board shall give his or her name and address. If several people wish to speak, each person is allotted 3 minutes until a total time of 30 minutes is used. During that period, no person may speak twice until all who desire to speak have had the opportunity to do so. The period of public participation may be expended by a majority of the board present and voting. Anyone like to address the board? Seeing there is none, we'll move on to item 7, the consent agenda. 701, minutes from the last meeting. 02, the treasurer's reports for October. 03, employment. 04, donation and grants. 05, stipends. 06, a certificate of fiscal officer. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, call the roll.
Mr. Whitman,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda,
Yes. On to item 8, action items. Approve the TEA teacher coverage MOU. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, please call the roll.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Mr. Perez, Mr. Whitman,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda,
Yes. 802, approve the Wheeler Pediatric Services Agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, please call the roll.
Mr. Whitman,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Mr. Perez, Dr. Hoyda,
Yes. 803, approve effective speech therapy independent contracting agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry, please call the roll.
Mr. Whitman,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda,
Yes. 804, approve the extension of the lease agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Is that the same agreement?
It's the same agreement. I look to put it back up for bid mid next summer before crop inputs are due in the fall.
Yeah, their bid was far better than any others.
That's correct.
Any further discussion? Mrs. Perry, please call the roll.
Mr. Whitman,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Mr. Perez, Dr. Hoyda,
Yes. 8.05, approve Capital Aluminum and Glass Corporation proposal.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
And we discussed this in finance. That's for the middle school windows or doors and entrances, correct?
Yes, it's for the 4 entrances of the classrooms over here that have double wide doors to get out for the large size of the room.
And then how much is the total project?
The total project is $59,000.
And then you indicated the differences. These are metal versus the wood that we had before, correct?
Correct, we're going with aluminum, and there's actually 2 windows on each side and an arch above it that all needs to be replaced to match.
Any further discussion? Mrs. Perry, please call the roll.
Mr. Widman?
Yes.
Dr. Gase?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Mr. Perez? Dr. Hoida?
Yes. Item 8.06, approve the 5-year forecast and assumptions.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes.
Mrs. Perry?
I can provide some information on that before we do the roll call. You should each have a copy of the draft forecast. This was presented to the Finance Committee last week. So the first thing you have is the forecast itself, and it's in the format that needs to be submitted to ODE by the end of this month. So the first 3 numerical columns are for the actual fiscal years 2019, 20, and 21, which have been completed. And then, of course, 5 forecasted years, including this current year, plus 4 more through 2026. Go down to line 601 in about the middle of the page. This is the line that shows if revenues or expenditures are exceeding the other. So you can see historically, revenues exceeded expenditures in 2019 and 21. Expenditures exceeded revenues in 2020, and then are projected to do that for all 5 of the forecasted years, 2022 through 2026. On line 702 is our actual cash balance, and you can see that that's that line in green, and that is in the black all the way through 2026. Now that is before any outstanding purchase orders, which have been running around $1 million a year. And that's for obligations that'll be paid in July or August, usually, just after the fiscal year closes. And then also on line 902, we have the capital improvements reservation that we started to project that we were setting aside $500,000 per year. That started in 2017. We used $1 million of that for the land purchase. We used $250,000 for additional technology and security equipment. I think that was in year 2019. So nonetheless, we have a projected $1,750,000 set aside in 2022. So that takes away from our cash balance because it's reserved. So it takes away from our unreserved balance. And then I add $500,000 each year until that is up to $3,750,000 in 2026. There are no replacement or renewal levies projected in this forecast. That's in the 11 area, 11.01, 11.02. So the next levy that we have that would need to be renewed wouldn't be until 2029, and that's the emergency levy. That is around 4.5 mils, and it collects $1.6 million. So that's not in this forecast because that's good through 2029. There are no new levies projected on this forecast. That's on line 1301 and 1302. So our unreserved fund balance, that's our cash, less our outstanding purchase orders at the end of the year, less the capital improvements reservation. Unreserved fund balance on 1501 is still black all the way through 2026. It goes down to about $1.3 million in 2026, and it's projected at about $13.8 million at the end of this year. But because of the deficit spending, expenditures exceeding revenues, back on line 601, that balance is projected to decline. So just talk a little bit about actual fiscal year 2021. At the end of June, I could see that our total revenues, once we had our final revenue numbers, were about $283,000 higher than what I had forecasted back in May. That's a variance of just 0.9%. Expenditures were about $1 million lower than forecasted. That's a variance of 3.4%. So my total variance in my balance was off a little over 4%. The state usually considers a forecast to be reasonable if either one of those variances are within 5%, which both of them were. Nonetheless, that means that we have nearly $1 million more at the end of the fiscal year than what we had projected. Now, some of that that projection was off because when I'm projecting in May, I still have a lot of obligations sitting out there for things that are really hard to predict, such as student placements in other districts or in residential treatment centers, the number of students that we have at the Tiffin Developmental Center that we still need to pay for because those obligations are there. And a lot of times those final reconciliations don't come in until after the close of the fiscal year. Also for special needs services such as occupational and physical therapy. And this year we also had the satellite classes at the high school that we were getting from the Vanguard Sentinel Center. So once all of those encumbrances are reconciled in usually July, August, and September, once we had our federal CARES Act money and additional federal funds, once those allocations were all identified, and once we had our new state funding simulations for the House Bill 110 that was passed right at the end of June, after the forecast was done in May, all of those things were incorporated into the new forecast. So 2021 looked better than what we projected, which means that 2022 will also, because each projected year is based on the prior year, what we think is going to happen there or what we know actually did happen there. If you compare actual fiscal year 2021 to projected fiscal year 2022, I'll just point out some fluctuations that are a little more obvious than they have been in the past. On line 1.035, which is our unrestricted state funding, that decreased $976,000 in 2022's projection. Now, most of that is due to the new model that funds students where they are educated rather than where they reside. The state has been funding students where they reside as long as I can remember. And then what happens is when you have students go out, money is transferred as an expenditure on your forecast to the other districts that they go out to. If they come in from other districts, then that money shows up on a different revenue line. I believe it's 106 other revenue. Regardless of a statewide increase in the base funding from the new biennial budget bill, the decrease is still there because more students are transferring out of our district than are coming in. On line 104, the restricted state funding, that doesn't have very many components. It's for some career tech funding, for economically disadvantaged students, but also it's for catastrophic special needs reimbursements that we can file for every year for specific students that cost, all of their costs are more than a certain threshold. Those reimbursements are not guaranteed. So while we received about $110,000 in 2021, I don't have it projected for 2022 because it depends on how much money the state allocates to the whole pool, and then what other districts apply for it. So we'll always apply for it, but we're only going to get a percentage of it. We never know what that percentage is going to be. So I don't project that just because I don't know those factors yet. On line 106, all other revenues, that increased $272,000 compared to last year. And that's due to excess cost reimbursements from other districts that their students are residing at the Tiffin Developmental Center. So we pay for the cost of that program, and then we file for excess costs, and then those reimbursements come in from the other districts a year later. So those have been added in for the first time. Also, the elimination of the state funding for the incoming open enrollment students. So that's the net difference on that line. Under expenditures on line 301, personal services, which is salaries for our staff, that increased $1.5 million. That's due to first of all, the expiration of state student wellness and success funds and the Federal CARES Act funding. Things that were funded by those two sources last year will no longer be funded this year. So the cost of that staffing comes back into the forecast, into the general fund, because the forecast is general fund only. Also, the annual years of experience and negotiated salary schedule increases are always in that line. So they're always going to cause an increase. Under 302, employee benefits, that increased about $500,000 this year due to, again, the expiration of the state's student wellness and success funds, which used to be segregated. I should have mentioned that before. That used to be segregated into a different fund as required by the state, but now it is just showing up in the new funding model. So it's no longer segregated, so that staff comes back in. Also, the Federal CARES Act funding, and our annual group insurance premium increases, which that's routine. Those are always going to cause that line to increase. On 303, purchase services, that decreased about $2.4 million. And that was due to the elimination of state funding deductions for the outgoing open enrollment, community school, and scholarship students. Wherever they are being educated, the funding will go directly to them instead of, as I said, coming in as revenue and then going out as expenditures. Also, estimated increases from the ESC for contracted services caused that line to increase, and additional special needs and residential student placements. On line 304, supplies and materials, that increased about $429,000 in 2022, and that is just for an unspent curriculum budget that is carried over to this year. On line 305, capital outlay, which is equipment, that increased $177,000, and that's the same thing that was for unspent technology and security budgets that weren't spent last year but will be spent this year. So with all of that, talk about our bottom line for a little bit. If we, without proposing any additional levies or income taxes, and maintaining the capital improvements reserve of $500,000 each year in the projection, we fall below the minimum reserved operating days in cash of 90, which is like my minimum goal. We fall below that in 2025 based on our ending cash balance. If we eliminate the capital improvements reserve and we include that reserved money into the cash balance as unreserved money, then we don't fall below 90 days of operating cash until 2026. And you have that particular scenario. I've marked it with a 0 up at the top just because that means no changes. We're not proposing any levy on this scenario. So it's basically just mimics the forecast as is. But one thing that I want to point out is that we have the deficit spending based on the state's parameters for fiscal caution, watch, or emergency. They measure that based on your operating deficit or your deficit spending. If that exceeds it doesn't exceed. If that is 2 to 7% of your prior year revenue in your current operating year, then they are going to deem that you are in fiscal caution. So based on our deficit spending projection in 2022 being at 3%, we would fall under the state's declaration of fiscal caution. And that would continue to increase once that goes over 7% and up to 14%, the state considers you to be in fiscal watch. If it goes over 15%, you would be in emergency. So we are in fiscal caution based on our current forecast from 2022 through 2024. And then we go to fiscal watch in 2025 and 2026, but we do not go to fiscal emergency. Fiscal caution basically means that the state could ask you for a plan of how you plan to correct your deficit spending. Fiscal watch would be a more formal process that they will ask you to submit a recovery plan, and they will monitor that every year to make sure that you're meeting that plan. So part of that plan would be either that you are going to attempt to pass a levy. They will keep checking to make sure that you do, or that you are cutting expenditures. So one of the first scenarios that I show you, and this is just marked number 1 at the upper right corner, we would need 4.99 property tax mills, maintain our capital improvement reserve in order to get those operating days back up to 90 at the end of the forecast in 2026. We would eliminate the fiscal caution in 2023 and 24, but would go back into fiscal caution in 25 and 26, but we do not end up in fiscal watch through the forecast. If we didn't maintain the capital improvements reservation and put that $500,000 per year back in our unreserved balance, we would need 2.5 property tax mills to get to 90 days of operating cash by the end of the forecast in 2026. We would, however, that would not help our deficit spending as much because 2.5 mills would obviously bring in about half of the first scenario. So we would end up in fiscal watch by the end of 2026. If we looked at a traditional income tax, we would need a 0.75% maintaining our capital improvements reservation in order to get to 90 operating days through the forecast in 2026. We would be in fiscal caution just for 2 years, 2022, this year, and 2023, but we would be fine through the rest of the forecast. If we looked at a traditional income tax and didn't maintain our capital improvements reservation, we would need a 0.5% income tax to keep 90 days of cash through the end of the forecast. And we would be in fiscal caution still with our deficit spending throughout the forecast. An earned income tax, we would need 0.75% with the capital improvements reservation maintained in order to get to 90 days of operating cash by the end of 2026. And we would be out of fiscal caution for 2 years, 2024 and 2025, but back in 2026. And the last scenario, an earned income tax of 0.5% without the capital improvements reservation would get us to maintaining 90 days of operating cash throughout the forecast, and we would be in fiscal caution throughout the forecast. Just a few final notes. Just keep in mind that deficit spending is not completely eliminated through the forecast in any of these scenarios. To actually do that, we would need 9.45 property tax mills to completely eliminate deficit spending without cutting anything, or a 1% traditional income tax, or a 1.25% earned income tax in 2022, anytime in calendar year 2022. So the election deadlines, which you've got those on the back of your scenario where for not proposing any taxes. The Board of Elections deadlines for 2 elections in 2022, May or November. February 2nd would be the first deadline to file with the Board of Elections if we wanted to propose a levy in May. If we wanted to propose an income tax, there would be an earlier deadline with the state of January 21st. For the November 8th election next year, August 10th would be the first deadline for the Board of Elections, which means usually acting in June and July to pass resolutions to meet that deadline. There's an earlier deadline of July 29th with the state if we wanted to do an income tax, but the board could still pass those resolutions in June and July to meet that deadline. A few other final notes. If the Fair School Funding Plan that was part of the last state biennial budget, if they would have fully implemented that, we would have received an approximate increase starting this year of $2 million per year in the forecast. But instead, it was restricted to a reduced phase-in, which is giving us about $99,000 this year and about a $359,000 increase next year. And it's only guaranteed for those 2 years because there will be a new biennial budget proposed for 2024. Also keep in mind that negotiated salary increases are not included in fiscal years 2023 through 2026. So salary expenditures are potentially understated. And new personnel, services, and supplies that are currently being funded by the Federal CARES Act ESSER 3 in 2022, 23, and 24 are not added back into the forecast in 2025 and 2026. Thus, expenditures in those years are potentially understated if we need to keep those programs. And then you also all have copies of the assumptions that go along with the forecast, which are basically the explanations that I just gave. So it's a lot of information. Questions?
If I may follow up, because we did discuss this in finance. One of the issues is, I think as you highlighted, this is based on the biennial budget that was passed, so we have no idea what's going to happen next biennium. We do have a reopener on our labor agreement next year, spring, I believe, and then we're going to have another agreement after that. I think worst case scenario is if we run a levy running into the emergency levy, but that would be down the road. We did have the superintendent at this meeting and our treasurer, and I think at finance we asked what's the recommendation to try to make these December deadlines, and I believe the superintendent, I'll let you speak on that, said no. I think that one, we have new board members, two, we don't want to rush into this. I think if he wants to do it, he's going to do it right. But the CARES money did buy us some time. So I think we were looking at 25, we're now looking at 26. And so I think at this point, just turn it over to the superintendent.
Well, I think I appreciate Mrs. Perry's report here. And again, it's very difficult to make these predictions when, our information is constantly changing. So the good news is that with this updated 5-year forecast, we're actually in a little bit better shape than where we were previously. So that does give us a little bit more time to plan, to think through. I think for me, the bottom line is this district has not received new operating money in well over 10 years. So that's the reason why, regarding any of these scenarios that Mrs. Perry has provided, that we're still in a deficit spending kind of a situation. It's because we've not received new money for so long. So while I don't think we're in an emergency situation at the moment, we do need to be planning towards the future. And I think we need to be planning some additional revenue. One of my observations about the district is that while we're very cost effective in many areas, the reason for that is because I believe we're understaffed in a lot of areas. And we're not in a situation where we're able to provide the level of services and programs to all of our students to the extent that I'd like to be able to provide them. And I think our community would agree. So I'm hoping to be able to use the strategic planning process as a mechanism to really identify and help inform the Board of Education so that we can make a reasonable plan and request when that proper time comes to go to the community. And I also want to get the community's input in that process. Because I'm not sure that they fully understand where we are. I know, there could be a perception, well, we're sending mixed messages, and we're not really sending mixed messages. The bottom line is our funding from the state has been flat for many, many years. Our expenses continue to increase. And the reason that we're even in the position we're in today is because this district has managed the district finances very well. And I know a lot of that has been a result of some reductions that were made a number of years ago that were very dramatic and very draconian. And that still continues to have an impact on our ability to provide educational services and programs to kids. So I want to really take a look at that. And I think we could be in a position where we could really turn the corner, establish more fiscal stability for the district, and maybe bring back some of those programs and services that maybe had been reduced in the past in the future. So my recommendation is I don't believe that we're going to be in a situation where we need to be on the ballot in May of 2022, but I certainly want to take a look at November, and I want to use the strategic planning process to help, map that out for us. So in terms of any impending deadlines, I personally, don't believe we need to be looking at that for February to meet any deadline in May. But I definitely want to leave the door open for later on this spring to see what might be in order for later on in the fall or the upcoming school year.
Sharon, I had a few questions. So our negotiation with the teachers and staff, it goes through next year. Is that correct?
This current fiscal year is the last one that is covered by negotiations.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So did you factor in like an expected inflationary rate? Did you use an inflationary rate for what we're going to need to pay staff? Is there any of that?
I always
calculated?
factor in, it's usually around 2% for the years of experience increases. And we also have column advancements for continuing education. If you go from a bachelor's to a master's, for
But
example.
nothing, that doesn't
Yeah.
include inflation though.
And then I also factor in some inflation for fluctuation. Yes, I do include that in here.
I noticed in some of the estimates, there was anywhere from a 1.5 to 2 to 3% inflation rates you factored. How do you choose?
It depends on basically the historical inflation for that particular line item.
So, am I to infer that, or are you inferring that the $1 million roughly we received less in in-state or grant and aid from this past year to next year? Is that at roughly 4,000 a student? Is that about 250 students that we have open enrolling out compared to coming in? Is that about
Number
right?
of students going.
If it's $1 million in this, well, you get about 4,000 from the state, don't we? Something like that?
6.
Per student?
Per student, it used to be about $6,000 per student. We got about $3,000 for our resident students, but if they left the district, about 6,000 went out. So now I will say that the state funding amount, that the increase that we should be getting of about 99,000, that's based on an early simulation. It's been a complete overhaul, so they haven't been able to provide any of the districts with their final calculation. That won't happen until next month. So if there's a significant difference in this forecast, then I can represent it and resubmit it to the state.
I've got another question. I looked at last year's forecast, and our cash balance, line 7.010 was several $1 million difference. Quite a bit less. In fact, I can tell you what it is. Line 7.01. We were forecasted for this upcoming year at 16 million. We're not far away there. But by 2020, would have been 2025, we were forecasted to be only at 1 million, and it's quite a bit different now. We're at 13 million. How does that number such a discrepancy?
What years are you comparing and which line?
I'm looking at last year's forecast for fiscal year 2025. It says we'll be at 1.652 million for cash on hand.
On line 702?
7.0, no, take that back. That was 7.01. 7.02 is 4.2 million in the red. And now 4.02, that's same year, basically 2025. It says we're at 9 million.
I'm sorry, Dr. Case, I don't have that forecast in front of me.
I do, it's right here. I'm telling you, that's what it is. So I just kind of curious as to how we could be so far in the red last year projection and so far in the black this year. It boggles my mind. Where did that money come from?
I think if
I don't think we have the right, you don't have the right forecast compared forecast because we do produce them monthly, I think, several times. And then creating this idea that we just pop up money in the millions is not correct. That's going to give the wrong impression to our community that somehow we just find money in the year.
I'm
Which
just
is
going
not
by the
accurate.
projections, that's all. I'm looking at these and wondering how it is that we were in emergency last year.
Are you
and
looking at November or May?
From last year's, this is
From
November.
1 year ago?
1 year ago, November, yeah.
When I spoke earlier about everything that has fluctuated since May, those things I already talked about. Federal CARES Act money.
Where is that? Where's the Federal CARES Act money? I mean, I know you said you can't put it on a line item, but where does it come in?
So that pulled some expenditures out for 2020, 2021, 2022, 23, 24. That money will expire in 2024.
it seems like it's
That's
probably
just one example of a fluctuation without having that November forecast in front of me and having all of the details that went into that forecast a year ago.
it seems like it's probably most appropriate that if we have questions like directly comparing one forecast to another, especially with how much they fluctuate, it's probably most appropriate if we send you those or bring those in or ask about that so that you can pull that data before we're here. Is that the best? Because I can't imagine keeping all of these numbers straight. Would that be the best if we have those types of questions?
That would be. I mean, usually I will go back and look at the most recent forecast, which was in May, and see what's fluctuated just kind of as a test. But I mean, we'll show you here. This is all of my detail for this forecast. There's that much detail that goes into it. So there could be several things in there that have changed.
Yeah, I'm just curious. It's a huge difference. I mean, I looked at all the other forecasts, very little difference. Very little difference from item to item.
And there's been a complete,
Well, I think to be fair, though,
complete
to say
state
there's no
funding
difference in the
overhaul.
other forecast for which one. That's not a fair statement to say. I mean, is it 2, 3, 4? It's just a unsupported statement to say that there isn't variance. Now, you also have to take into account who's superintendent, who's on the board. But I think this is something that probably should be hashed out at maybe a finance committee meeting. We meet the Tuesday before a board meeting, and she takes extensive time to go over and answer these questions, and also answers board questions if you email her. So,
And
I
we
mean,
have reorganization coming up in January. So Dr. Gase, if you're interested in finance, that could be a
Yeah,
a
I'm
great place
just,
to
you
hop
know, once one gets accused of not being transparent, I think it's important that we become transparent.
Sure, but in a responsible way so that
Yeah,
our,
this is pretty responsible on my part, I think.
well, but giving her the information that you're going to ask about beforehand so she can have all
I
of
just
that
looked at this
data.
last night, so I didn't have time. I'd have happily done it, but I didn't have time since last night.
We've had it for years. I think there was a motion, correct, Dr. Hoyt?
I have
There was a motion
another
and-
question, Jeff. As we take a look at the additional funds that the state legislator told us we'd be getting, when do we anticipate knowing if those funds will actually come through? I think I heard you say it would be not until the next budget cycle from the state.
From the state, the projected 100,000 increase that we should get this year, that will not, I cannot see that final calculation and confirm that until next month.
Okay.
So the funding changed starting in July of this year to July 2021, but we're actually not going to get that funding until next month. Unfortunately, the forecast was due this month, but the state doesn't have the final they're hoping to have the final calculations done next month. As far as, are you talking about the $2 million that we were
Right,
projected
so,
to
yeah.
receive?
Hopefully, if they don't change that, then that would be some additional revenue for us. But we
That
won't
will
know
take,
until.
yeah, that'll take 5 to 6 years at the current phase in.
Right, that was taken.
But that
was
phase in is
taken out in
subject
the
to
Senate
change in
compromise, I think.
2024.
Mhm. The good news is it's potential.
Or the bad news is it's potential.
I get you.
Can't spend potential.
Right.
Any further discussion before I have Mrs. Perry call the roll?
Just a thank you to Mrs. Perry for the work on these and for taking the time to explain them again here as well. Thank you.
Mrs. Perry, call the roll.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Mr. Widman,
Yes.
Dr. Gase, Dr. Hoyda.
Yes. Item 9, opportunity for the public to dialogue with the board. Anyone like to dialogue with us? Anyone else? Seeing there is none, item 10, board discussion.
Yeah, so I had a question, and I don't know some of y'all who have been on the board longer and who have been through election cycles far more than I have. You know, when I came onto the board, I was the only one that was new. Dr. Gase and I came on, and he had been on before. And my trajectory onto the board was a little rough. We were in the midst of some stuff. And so I don't know what a typical like onboarding of board members looks like. Do we typically get together with new board members? Do we hold special meetings? Like what does that typically look like when we're onboarding folks for continuity of the board and the processes? What does that look like in the past?
You want to address that?
We've had board retreats or just informal gathering to ask questions, to take a look at different things. Certainly one of the things that's advantageous is to serve on the different committees and to rotate the committee so you have an understanding of not only just the specific, but you learn other committees as you go down the road. And it's, having meetings and having discussion Board retreats?
Largely dependent upon the superintendent. I mean,
Yeah, superintendent's
you know,
huge in that.
kind of sets the tone, I think, for a lot of that. So I think it's,
And then they also, was it OSBA has the
OSBA?
new board member thing that you should take in the first 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, which is a great training. I think that was stellar. I just didn't know if we had a formalized process or if we had a way that we had done like warm handoffs or what we had done in the past. Mine was such an odd time, so I didn't know if there was other things in place that y'all experienced, so that there were pieces that happened prior to January, because that January meeting is you're up and running. So I just didn't know if it had looked different in the past.
No, in December, we appoint a president pro tem and then if you have your organization meeting, what, by the 10th of January? Isn't it, Mrs. Perry? It has to be by the 10th? Have that committees and election of the board officers for the new year, and then you're on your way.
You hit on something, because I did actually take one of the trainings at the conference on that, on using onboarding and orientation to build a stronger board. I know my experience, and it wasn't due to any of the board members. It was just a packet in the mail with the OSBA booklets that they gave you, and then just showing up to the board meeting and hoping I got to the right place. That was it. That was the entire onboarding process. And it makes it difficult. And I think that with the two coming on, I know I've already reached out, and superintendent, I believe, is already reaching out to them. And so that they at least understand some of the basics of the Open Meetings Act, or they understand how meetings are run, how we don't formally adopt Robert's rules, but we use it informally, things like that, or even just knowing how to get in here. Nobody ever told me you guys use the back door. I always use the front door. So I was like, hey, or that you guys can park back there, or how to even get a hold of the superintendent. I know that was something new, or who the treasurer was. I didn't learn about that until I started, in month 2, I think. So, and then the beauty of it is in January for the 2 board members coming on is we organize, and you get asked these big decisions about who your officers are going to be and what committees you want, and you have no idea. You bring your families, and it's a small room. And then second, in 2 weeks, you're getting presented with cards for thanking you for Board Appreciation Month. And it's like, I've been on the board for a week. So it's a different experience. And it's like, wait, I didn't do anything yet. So, but yeah, I trust that Dr. Zoller's going to, work them in, and I hope that he does that. So.
Well, and it sounds like maybe an opportunity for us to explore that process and maybe put a policy in place or do something where there's a warm onboarding and getting to know, because those who are exiting have a lot of historical knowledge, have a lot of experience. And so being able to make that shift, I think only betters the district, because we're led by the superintendent, but also we have to work as a group. So I think there's some opportunity there, and I would like to maybe explore that as we move forward.
Any other board discussion? Seeing there is none, we don't have any need for an executive session, correct, Dr. Zoller? Okay, so moving along, we need a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Second.
Mrs. Perry, call the roll.
And was that Dr. Gase?
Yes.
And Mr. Whitman?
Yes.
Dr. Gase?
Yes.
Mr. Whitman?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyda?
Yes. The next regular board meeting will be on December 21st at 6 p.m. in the middle school cafetorium. Thanks for your attendance.